Behind that unmoving face, I could tell you exactly what I was thinking when he said it. He was a big man, Commander Brack Holst, head of security for the Valdrinian diplomatic mission, broad through the shoulders and used to rooms that went quiet when he entered. He had been walking the processional corridor with Colonel Aldane since 7:30 that morning, reviewing access points for the autumn convocation. And somewhere between the first checkpoint and the gilded archway that marked the entrance to the large vestibule, he had decided that I was a curiosity worth commenting on. He stopped 2 feet away from my post, not in front of me, beside me, the way a man examines something mounted on a wall. He looked me up and down, the red tunic, the tall bearskin, the white gloves, the rifle held at the carry. He turned to the colonel with a short laugh. "Ceremonial," he said. It was not a question. The colonel said something measured in reply. I did not catch it. I was not meant to. Holst wasn't finished. He stepped back, tilted his head, and addressed me directly, or rather addressed the space I occupied, the way a person talks at a statue to prove it won't answer. "You know what you remind me of? A very expensive doorstop." He smiled at the colonel. "No offense to the tradition, but if anything actually happened in this corridor, your man here would be the last thing I'd call." I kept my eyes forward. I kept my hands still. I kept my breathing even. The colonel looked at me briefly, just a glance, the kind that carries a whole sentence, and then walked Holst on down the corridor toward the vestibule entrance. I listened to their footsteps fade on the stone flags. I listened to the palace settle around me, and I thought about something a major had said to me a long time ago, on a very different kind of post, in a place with no gilded railings and no stone that had ever heard applause. He had said, "The loudest man in the room is always the one who has never needed to be quiet." I had needed to be quiet for years before I ever put on the bearskin. Let me tell you what Commander Holst didn't know about the man he'd just called a doorstop. 15 years before that morning, I was not standing at a palace gate. I was working close protection in a country whose name would mean nothing to most people, under a set of orders that would never appear in any public record. 3 tours, 14 months of the sexor spent in environments where the margin between discipline and catastrophe was measured in fractions of a second. I had been shot at. I had been tested the way men are tested when the support you were promised does not arrive, and the decision is yours alone, and no one will see what you do next except the people who need you to do it right. I had earned a commendation that I am not able to describe in detail. The file is sealed. I know what it says. The colonel knows what it says. That morning, Commander Holst did not. I had come to the ceremonial regiment at 34. Some men would have called it a step down. I never thought of it that way. Standing a post requires everything a man has: attention, restraint, the discipline to hold when every nerve says move. It is not a lesser version of what I had done before. It is the same thing, quieter. Holst thought the stillness was emptiness. He had no idea it was the fullest thing I knew how to do. The autumn convocation began at 9. I was not in the main hall. My post was the processional corridor, a long, high-ceilinged passage of pale stone and dark wood paneling that connected the outer vestibule to the eastern gallery. During the convocation itself, it served as the transfer route for household staff, late-arriving attachés, and the secondary movements of the diplomatic contingents. Foot traffic was light but not absent. My task was simple: stand the post, observe, and hold the threshold. For a man who didn't know what he was watching, that corridor looked like a very quiet room with a very still man in it. For 90 minutes, that is what I appeared to be. What I actually was, a man who had spent those 90 minutes in a continuous low state of readiness that most people would not recognize as alertness because it carries no visible tension, no scanning, no fidgeting, just a quality of attention that sits behind still eyes, cataloging every face that passed the threshold, every deviation from expected gait, every wrong detail in the background of a perfectly normal-looking thing. I had learned to sustain that state for 8-hour stretches in environments far less comfortable than a marble corridor in a palace. The plush surroundings made no difference to the calibration. I knew the name of every person authorized to transit that corridor during the convocation window. I knew the face of every staff member rostered for the shift. I had memorized the credential color coding on the access lanyards without appearing to look at any of them. At 7 minutes past 10, the corridor was quiet. At 8 minutes past, it wasn't. He came through the service entrance at the corridor's eastern end, a door that should have been sealed during the convocation, and would have been, except that the duty officer who secured it had received an erroneous clearance override from a falsified credentials packet that the palace's external access system had passed without a flag. I would learn all of that later. In the moment, what I knew was this: a man had entered the corridor at pace, He was dressed in dark civilian clothes against the staff protocol for a formal day. His access lanyard was the wrong color entirely, and the way he moved, body angled, one hand pressed against the side of his jacket, eyes tracking exits, not faces, told me everything I needed to know before he had covered 10 yards. I had been still for 90 minutes. I had been ready for 15 years. I did not shout. I did not lunge. I spoke in a level voice, clear enough to carry the length of the corridor. Post, stand where you are. He did not stand. He continued forward. His hand came out from his jacket, and I registered what was in it, and I made the decision that the situation required. Everything that followed took 40 seconds. I want to be precise about that, because people who were not there later spoke about it in ways that added detail that was never present. There was no spectacular struggle. There was no performance. There was the work, the set of trained responses that I had built into my body over years of practice until they ran below the level of conscious thought. And then there was the stillness on the other side of it. The man was face down on the stone floor of the corridor, the weapon 2 feet away, and I was standing over him with his arm controlled, and my boot on the device he had tried to reach in the fall. My breathing was the same as it had been when the corridor was empty. That is not bravado. That is what the training is for. I pressed the duty signal on the communication piece at my collar. I gave the situation report in 8 words. Then I waited. 40 seconds later, the first response team came through the vestibule door at a run. Behind them, because he had been reviewing the eastern gallery when the signal reached Colonel Aldane's staff, came Commander Brack Holst. He entered the corridor at a jog and pulled up short. The man was still on the floor. The weapon had been secured by the response team. I had stepped back to the correct position, not in the way, not retreating, where I could see both ends of the corridor and still hold the ground. The team was working efficiently around me. I was still. Holst stood in the corridor entrance for a long moment. His face went through several things in quick succession: surprise, recalculation, something closer to confusion than any expression I'd expected from a man of his rank. The colonel arrived 2 minutes later. He read the situation in the time it took him to cross from the vestibule to my post. He asked me 3 questions: the entry point, the nature of the device, whether anyone else had passed through, and I answered each one clearly and without elaboration. He gave 3 instructions to the team lead. Then he turned to Holst. "Did you see the threshold hold?" the colonel asked. Holst said nothing. "Corporal Rail secured the corridor and controlled the subject before the response team reached this end," the colonel said. "In 40 seconds. He was not boasting on my behalf. He was stating facts the way men do when facts are the most useful thing available. His service record has been in my possession since he was assigned to this post. I'll have a copy sent to your attaché office this afternoon, if you'd find it useful." Holst looked at me then, not the way he had looked at me that morning, not the sideways, dismissive inspection. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he has badly miscalculated. I kept my eyes forward. There is something I should explain, because people often ask me about that moment later, and they phrase the question wrong. They want to know if I felt satisfied. If it felt good to be vindicated that way in front of the man who had dismissed me, they expect me to say yes or to say no in a way that implies yes. And I understand why they expect it. The story has a certain shape that seems to call for that emotion. But the honest answer is that I did not feel much of anything, except that the corridor had been held, the convocation had not been disrupted, and the people inside the eastern gallery were unaware that anything had happened at all. That was the outcome. The job was done. The rest of it. Holst's expression, the colonel's measured words, whatever was written in the file I never needed to read aloud, was beside the point in the way that weather is beside the point to a man to standing a post. It is the background condition. It is not the work. The work is the stillness. The work is the 40 years of accumulated discipline that makes 40 seconds possible when they need to be. The work is holding the line when the man beside you has decided the line is decoration. The colonel sent Holst's attaché office a copy of my service record that afternoon. I know because I was on post when the messenger carried it through, and the colonel, passing on his way back from a senior staff meeting, paused beside me for a moment and said very quietly, "I believe Commander Holst has been reading this evening." I said nothing. The colonel did not appear to expect me to. He paused a beat longer than usual before he moved on. Not to say anything more, just a pause, the kind a man makes when he has seen something confirmed that he already knew. Then his footsteps resumed and faded toward the west wing, and the corridor was mine again. I thought about that, standing my last hour of the watch. The file was accurate, as far as files go. It had the dates, the postings, the commendation citation stripped to its formal language. What files cannot hold is the weight of the thing. The particular quality of a night when you are the last piece between one outcome and another, and you find in that moment that your hands are steady. That is not in any record. That lives in the body. That is what standing a post means. Whether the post is a stone floor in a ceremonial corridor or a dirt road in a country no one is watching. The corridor was quiet. The gilded railings caught the last of the afternoon light. The palace settled back into its rhythms the way it always did. The footsteps of staff, the distant sound of a door, the particular silence of stone that has held a long time and intends to hold longer. The convocation had concluded without incident. There had been no announcement, no disruption, no record of the breach visible to anyone who attended the ceremony or read the following day's formal proceedings. The subject had been processed and transferred by nightfall, and I was still at my post. I want to be clear about one last thing. I am not telling you this story because I want you to think that Holst was a fool, or that the men in the polished offices with the tactical units and the credentials packages are lesser than the man standing a line in a red tunic. That is not the point. Most of those men are very good at what they do, and the work they do matters. The work I do matters differently, not more, not less. It matters at the threshold. It matters in the corridor at 8 minutes past 10 when the door opens the wrong way, and the response team is 90 seconds out. The point is simpler than any of that. The point is that the stillness is not the absence of something. It is not waiting because there is nothing to do. It is readiness refined to its quietest form. Every nerve calibrated, every second of the years behind you compressed into the posture, the grip, the level breathing, the level eyes. Holst saw a doorstop. He saw the tunic and the bearskin and the ceremony of it, and he concluded there was nothing underneath. A lot of people make that mistake. They see a man who will not react to provocation and they read it as vacancy. What they are actually seeing is everything a man has, held still. I stood that post until the end of my watch. I marked it off in the register the way I always did. I handed the corridor to the evening detail, walked to the duty room, and sat down with a mug of something warm. The corridor was quiet. The day was done. That was enough. That has always been enough.